Okay, everyone, if we're ready to start, I see Doug's arrived. And I've apologized for leaving you just for a minute to open the door. Anyhow, I've been discussing with Doug what we might have on the agenda, and I'm open to any ideas, because when I wrote the invitation, I didn't have any particular ideas for the agenda. I was hoping that Anton, whose surname begins with a K, and I can't remember, Keskinen, I think, something like that, from the Finnish group, might be able to join us, but he's apologized. But he sent a quite little email, which I've only just given permission for him to go to the Planetary group. So you may not have seen it yet. It's on the same thread as this meeting, so you might be able to see it. Anyhow, he says his priority at the moment is deciding what the priorities are, because there's so many things which seem to be the high priority for him to do. So that's something we need to discuss, how we can help him. Now, there's some other things that have come up. There's mention of an international albedo union. I think, Robert, might you be able to tell us something about that?
I'm happy to discuss.
Robert, Judith?
Yeah, and Robert Chris wants to speak.
Oh, right, okay. Robert,
I'd be interested to just canvass people's views on this exchange I've had with Yatao in the last couple of days about developing a metric for linking various albedo enhancement methods to their impact on the Earth energy imbalance.
Okay, let's put that top of the agenda then. Conversation. That can come under International Albedo Union, perhaps.
Wherever you're chairing it, you like.
Yeah. Okay, well, Robert, Juliet might be able to give some comments on this idea of a union, and then you can talk about the albedo of the planet as at large, which is a conversation with Yatao, which I have been following, but I haven't interrupted it with any comments, because I can't remember if I did, but I've forgotten if I did. So that can be one item on the agenda. So let's put those together.
Well, I'd be happy to kick off with some discussion of, I suppose, albedo governance as
okay.
a happening topic. But why don't we get underway with that, and then if there are other things that that people want to raise, I think that can flow into a conversation around how to measure albedo. It's very much, as you say, John, a closely related topic. It's a conversation that's I've mainly been having with Brian von Hertzen, and in recognition that albedo enhancement is the most urgent and important priority for preventing dangerous climate change and tipping points, and is generally unrecognised. And Brian's comment was that the model of the International Astronomical Union is quite useful as a organisation that has a program of activities that is developed with input from expert members from around the world, and given the I suppose significant budget for telescopes and astronomical observation, that there's a need for the prioritization of expenditure, and so there's a whole governance process for setting the decision-making process, and noting the lively opinions that various people have about the priorities for albedo. As I've commented in response to Robert Chris and in the thread on the measurement of albedo, that all of our personal opinions don't really amount to anything in the absence of detailed research, which is significantly funded, and with large scale, credible input, and so what is needed is an organisation that is specifically and solely devoted to albedo enhancement as an international goal, as something that ought to be a priority for climate change. And so one of the questions that that people have naturally raised about that proposal is, well, why would you have an organisation that's only focused on albedo enhancement rather than carbon dioxide removal, greenhouse gas removal, and emission reduction? And I think the answer to that is that there's already significant recognition of the importance of carbon-based climate responses, and but there's a complete lack of recognition of the need to govern and resource and manage albedo-based responses, and further that albedo-based responses have a natural international context, and we see that especially with a technology like both SAI and MCB. Like, while it's possible to do small scale trials that are within a national jurisdiction, they generally do have international impacts, and so that there's a need for an international approach. Another question that's been raised, and we've had a range of conversations. Yatao raised the very idealistic suggestion that the word international is a bit obsolete because it recognises the nation state, and my view is that the most important thing in climate policy is realism, and the whole politics of realism is something that Robert Chris has also emphasised, and so the idea that we should just encourage political realism, i.e., the leadership of existing political processes, and rather than any idealistic suggestion of reforming existing political processes, but endeavouring to work through political processes and just, I suppose, encouraging them to recognise the climate situation in an honest and scientific way, which, of course, they haven't done through the IPCC. I think that that's idealistic enough without while recognising that the negotiations between governments are the basis of any real climate policy. So that's some of the thinking that comes to my mind regarding the suggestion for an international albedo union. I think that the other things are, why would we use the word union? And that's I think maybe the title is obviously up for discussion. So whether it does have international in the title or world or global is open for discussion, but also union is a word that essentially just comes from the astronomical union, and so we probably wouldn't end up with that title because of the confusion with the existing IAU, the International Astronomical Union. And that's the use of union there doesn't raise the politics of trade unions, but it does reflect the need for united thinking, and so terms like fund and there are other titles that are possible, but essentially the point is to encourage all governments to support the recognition of the need for albedo enhancement as a climate priority. And I think that an initial priority should be to refreeze the Arctic, and the point there being that refreezing the Arctic does require such a body that would see the management of Arctic, that would initially set albedo enhancement as a shared goal. That's a difficult enough challenge, which is quite distant. It was useful in conversation with Anton Keskinen at the HPAC meeting. I raised with him the value of on this theme, and he agreed that there is the potential for a small nation, a more enlightened nation such as Finland, to be more amenable to influence on a changed way of thinking about climate policy, and putting albedo as a policy priority, and then working to lobby the bigger nations to cooperate on albedo enhancement. And I think that the problem that we face with setting refreezing the Arctic as a policy goal is oil and gas and shipping as the major economic interests that are likely to oppose it. So that's a significant challenge. Similarly, the potential for Australia to take a lead on albedo enhancement in the Southern Ocean is also worth discussing. So those are a few things. I'll leave it at that. I think the conversation that Robert Chris has opened up about albedo measurement naturally flows on from that, and Ye Tao's concept of cooling return on investment is one that's just opens up the measurement theme. So either I'm happy to just hand back to you, John, or Robert to comment.
Yeah. Okay. Let's hand over to Robert Chris, since he's been having these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I'll assume that most of you have at least glanced at this thread. It's only been running for a short while, but it crossed my mind some time ago that one of the problems that we have in presenting the whole concept of cooling and albedo enhancement to policymakers and others, for that matter, outside the rarefied atmosphere of these groups dedicated to this subject, is that there isn't an obvious way of comparing and contrasting alternative methods of proceeding. So, whether we talk about SAI or MCB or any one of Sev Clark's several suggestions of buoyant flakes and so on and so forth, all of these are held to be albedo enhancing technologies, and the rhetoric here is that the rhetoric that we employ is that by deploying any of these technologies, what we do is we increase the Earth's albedo, and the consequence of that is that more energy passes across the top of the atmosphere into outer space and effectively cools the ecosphere. And I think that it is generally understood that unless we can reverse the flux at the top of the atmosphere, we're not going to cool the planet, because ultimately the only way of cooling the planet is to get rid of some of the accumulated energy that has arrived here. So we have to put that into reverse for it to be meaningful. And the problem with all of the greenhouse gas focused methods is that they do it, but they do it very slowly. And we are getting to a point where we need faster action, and the great attraction of albedo enhancement is that in broad terms, it does it very much more rapidly. So what I was trying to do was to develop some way of telling a more compelling story to non-scientific people who needed to be influenced in order to affect policy change. And it struck me that it would be great if we could have a metric that could be used across all albedo enhancing methods, to say that, this is a method that will by this metric we would quantify the amount of the albedo enhancement, and from there you could assess which methods are producing more albedo enhancement, and which needed more resource for the same amount of albedo enhancement, whether that resource is materials or land or ocean or whatever is required. But without some sense of the extent to which the methods return energy back across the top of the atmosphere, it struck me we had a bit of a problem. So I came up with this really simple idea. Okay, albedo is a measure from 0 to 1 of the reflectivity of a surface. 0 you have a perfect black body, and all of the energy that falls on it is absorbed by the surface. And at 1, the albedo of 1 means that all of the energy that falls on the surface is reflected back and none is absorbed. Now, in round terms, the albedo of the Earth as a whole is 0.3 or thereabouts. So it struck me that if we could say that, okay, let's just take an example for just the sake of simplicity. Marine cloud brightening. Marine cloud brightening is going to increase the albedo of the Earth's surface, all right, not exact surface, because the clouds obviously are slightly above it, but as far as the top of the atmosphere is concerned, it's on the surface. And they're going to do this by making the clouds whiter and therefore reflecting more of the incident light. It's not a kind of a vertical mirror where it goes down and then up again, because it obviously there's scattering and some of the energy will go in all directions. So I thought to myself, okay, fine. Well, how much whiter does marine cloud brightening make the cloud? Now, how much more energy is reflected from the cloud by virtue of the MCB? And secondly, and crucially, how much of that reflection actually finds its way up to the top of the atmosphere? Because of course, just as the atmosphere absorbs some of the shortwave radiation on the way in, then surely it will similarly absorb some of that radiation on the way out. But it ought to be possible to develop some global averages or regional averages. It may well be that those relationships vary according to latitude, because the incidence of the energy is going through a thicker slice of the atmosphere and so on. But then if we could say, well, okay, fine, this process will increase the albedo of whatever it is that's being made brighter, whether it's the clouds or rooftops or fields, is going to increase that albedo from X to X plus D. And so we got this number, this D, and then we can say, okay, and we're going to do it over an area of X. So you multiply D by X, and that tells you how much your total energy reflection is going to be. And actually, why should that in principle be different for any type of albedo enhancement? And if you could develop a statistic along those lines, it ought to be applicable right across the board. And then you could actually start comparing different albedo methods and say, well, actually, this is good. This one can reflect more energy per square meter. But on the other hand, the problem with this one is that it requires more resources or it's more expensive. And you can start to categorize these methods in a very much more helpful way. Because one of the things that I am very focused on is that there ain't no way that all of the ideas that are emerging from some very creative minds about how to enhance the Earth's albedo are going to all be developed. At some point, they're going to be winnowed down to the favored few, and we need to.
It's exactly right, Robert. And the work that Ye Tao has done with the concept of cooling return on investment is what I see as the answer to this common metric requirement, and it's looking at the basic measure of watts per square meter as the Earth energy imbalance as the target, and then quantifying the impact in terms of cost. And I know Stephen would be able to speak at considerable length on the Toomey effect and the work of John Latham in calculating the
I don't think you want to give
effect.
Robert, can I just interrupt? Let me interrupt your interruption, but I don't want to get into the detail of how it's done.
I know, yeah.
My concern is whether or not we should be actively working now to create such a metric. And if it's Ye Tao CROI, then why, or maybe it's happening and I don't know about it, but what should we actually actively be putting together a team of people to sit down and actually make this happen and develop this metric from just being a good, get Ye Tao's good idea into something that we can actually start to use in an active fashion and start selling to other people as the way forward. So Is it
I think we've absolutely got your point, Robert. And I got this point a few months ago and decided that this is what our group might do and submit as a contribution to the debate on planetary restoration at the AGU this coming December. So in my abstract, I said, we need to compare what cooling power that different methods have, and I've got some ideas from what kind of cooling power can be produced by stratospheric aerosol injection from Doug McMartin, who's an expert on that. And they know pretty precisely how much you can get from the sulfuric acid haze that's produced, knowing the kind of size of droplets and so on. And I've already started on marine cloud brightening, doing exactly what you said. What's the change in albedo that produced? And I suggested that the albedo change might be from.
But let's not get into that, John.
I'm just saying.
We've had those.
I'm just saying that I've actually started doing exactly what I think you're suggesting.
But the trouble is, John, that for you or me or anyone to do it is a bit irrelevant in the context of gaining credibility. Like, it's only when you have competent authorities who have the expertise and the standing that any sort of findings will have any recognition. And it's also the problem of having a process of the acceptance of field trials that will be able to test the models and the theory, and just find out whether there are any mistakes in the thinking that goes in. So it's all like just talking about what the cooling return on investment or whatever other quantification of the impact on Earth energy imbalance might be is it's only if you have some process to actually measure it and test it that it makes any difference. So I want to invite Jonathan Cole to speak. Jonathan has put a couple of comments into the chat and recognizing the work of Ye Tao, for example, and also just asking about the a further subsequent agenda item that we can come to about the fear of testing. But Jonathan, what's your thoughts on this agenda point?
Thank you. I've given it a lot of thought as I build structures to shield small spaces, size of a house or smaller, from heat, essentially, but direct sunlight, of course. And I think that we have to have at least a minimum of 2 very well thought out, standardized measurements to talk about. One of them would relate to an ecosystem that is being directly affected by something that is reducing the amount of sunlight or heat energy of any kind coming into that ecosystem. And then the second, would be a top of atmosphere departure of whatever forms of wavelength or other types of heat leaving the planet and helping us with our overall energy balance. A procedure like SAI may do a pretty good job sending heat back out to space from the stratosphere, but it probably won't change the temperature in the living quarters of somebody in the Middle East during a hot spell. So it would have a number associated with it. Let's say it sends back the equivalent of 2 watts per meter square or something from top of atmosphere. But to the person living in that hot spell, it really won't have a direct effect on their survivability. Whereas you have something like covering a home with mirrors or mirrored surfaces or anything reflective could change the temperature inside that house from 65 degrees Celsius on a hot day to 30 degrees Celsius. This is a fantastic result. And for that person, they're going to be very excited about knowing what the number is that's associated with that. And then you'll have devices that do a little bit of both. You have the house with the reflective roof that happens to also send a nice amount of light back out to space. Maybe it would be able to have a 0.1 rating for what it sends out to top of atmosphere, but also maybe a 0.6 rating for what it does in the ecosystem. Similarly, over agricultural areas, you could shield the crops and create a better growing environment. And that would have a very high rating for localized ecosystem, and probably a pretty good rating for sending stuff out top of atmosphere. I don't think we'll be able to have one number or one idea that captures the value of albedo changes. Some will be ecosystem related and very localized, and that's really desirable. That's, I think, where we can get people excited about it. And then there'll be the top of atmosphere, which, of course, in the long run for global cooling, that's what we need. So I simply propose that we break it apart into at least 2 and look for it.
Robert, Chris?
Yeah, I just want to pick up that this is actually very similar to a point that Ye Tao made in this correspondence with him. I'm intrigued by this because it didn't occur to me that anybody who was interested in albedo management in terms of climate change was building into this concern about localized changes. Now, I can understand perfectly the point that Jonathan's making, that at a local level there could be all sorts of benefits, co-benefits in cooling, to just to make your living environment more habitable and less oppressive. But ultimately, from a climate change perspective, this is of little significance, because all that's happening there is that the heat or the energy is being moved around from one place to another within the ecosystem, because the only metric, the only issue that matters is reversing the flux at the top of the atmosphere, taking the energy out of the ecosystem. Everything else, to my way of thinking, is it's either irrelevant or a nice to have, but not a need to have. And so I agree with you, Jonathan, totally, that we need to separate these 2 things out. But I don't think the localized, and I think that the localized factor may have considerable commercial interest because it's to individuals' benefit, and they may well be prepared to pay for that because there'll be a market for it. But the climate benefit of what's happening at the top of the atmosphere, that's a public good. That's not something that's in the same category at all. And I think, personally, I'm only concerned about the climate change issue. I'm not concerned about the local issues. So that metric is the one that matters to me, and the rest of it is largely irrelevant. I think that's my own personal take on this. But I think the focus, if we are concerned about climate change, we have to focus on what's going on at the top of the atmosphere first, and everything else is a distant second.
And it raises this distinction.
Okay, you've made it.
It raises the distinction
I think
between
you've made that.
Between climate and environment. And Doug McMartin has just published a new paper looking at the local benefits of marine cloud brightening. And so, for example, the cooling of the Gulf Stream within the Gulf of Mexico would have significant hurricane mitigation benefits, and while also raising the cooling the Gulf Stream with potential to slow down the meridional overturning of the North Atlantic current. And so Jonathan wants to respond again.
Yeah. Well, I agree too. I didn't get into this activity in order to make dog houses a little cooler so my dog would be less hot in the summer. But I think that people are able to conceive of two important factors when it comes to machinery, purchases in life, political decisions, who to elect, that kind of thing. We, for instance, with automobiles in the early days, we had this idea of the city mileage and the highway mileage. And I remember being careful to make that decision. So here we have the concept of a localized cooling and a global cooling. And people could look at how they want to optimize that. I think we that have, air conditioning in our homes, we're a little bit privileged in the sense that we can put our attention always on the top of atmosphere. But I think for an ever-growing segment of the population, the regional effects are going to be quite important, and they will support us and march for us and protest for us and change their governments and change the mechanisms of society if that's necessary, because we can service their personal needs as well as this top of atmosphere. So I think the movement is larger when it includes the regional and local effects and not just the top of atmosphere.
Well, just one brief comment on that. I've got no problem with that, so long as the local interests do not compromise the global ones.
Well, the thing is that local interests are likely to provide funding. So, for example, if the city of Los Angeles wished to cool the Pacific Ocean adjacent to it as essentially an air conditioning project, then they would be willing to fund marine cloud brightening over their immediate region, and so it's quite possible that the gradual build up of support for global climate impacts would need to start with these localized effects, whether it's the Great Barrier Reef, the Gulf of Mexico, other places like the Pacific off LA, and or the Pacific Ocean off Sydney, for that matter, and so it's quite likely that there would be local funding, but those sorts of local effects, they would have to some extent global impacts, and these are issues that have been raised in relation to how refreezing the Arctic would only be plausible with international agreement. And so I did want to also comment that I do see cooling return on investment as a single metric that, in principle, everything that we do can be quantified in terms of watts per square meter at top of atmosphere, and over time and cost, and so that includes changing from that includes carbon effects. Like, the whole concept that emission reduction mitigates climate change is based on the observation that greenhouse gases increase radiative forcing, and so radiative forcing is central to the whole concept of emission reduction, except its impact on the impact of cutting emissions on radiative forcing is so minuscule that connection has been somewhat obscured in the conversation. Yes, theoretically, it totally underpins it, and the problem that we face is that direct measures to enhance albedo have several orders of magnitude superiority in cost terms, in terms of cooling return on investment, and this is a point that Ye has made very effectively. And like his comment is that all carbon-based measures are really quite marginal in terms of the cooling return on investment that's required to actually slow down climate change. And so it still is a common metric, and I think one of the issues there is permanence. That is, if you add some sulfur to the stratosphere, then it has a short-term impact, whereas if you build a mirror, it has a longer-term impact, and if you physically remove methane, or CO2, it has often a much longer-term impact. So all of these things have to be factored in, but to me it gets back to this question around who is the competent authority to measure it, and so I think that it's a really useful conversation. Now I shared the diagram that I produced from the Nature paper from 2016 on monitoring Earth's energy imbalance, and I found the part of that chart that was from that Nature article extremely helpful in just showing the importance of demonstrating the net zero heating concept as the ultimate goal of all of this work on albedo enhancement. And so Clive Ellsworth replied that he didn't understand the net zero heating concept, so I was able to clarify that that's against the baseline of the Holocene. And so shifting our net zero thinking just into explaining that net zero emissions is really a very small step along the way to climate stability, and that we do need to have a thinking around net zero heating as a way to respond to the climate problem. It is useful, and just being able to quantify the impacts of aerosols, the existing cooling effect of aerosols, and to set that in terms of watts per square meter against the warming effect of greenhouse gases, etc. There is a lot of work that's already been done for this quantification, but it needs field implementation to be able to firm up those numbers.
So what you're saying is that we need trials. Now, as far as obtaining these figures, I'm committed to writing a paper, well, assuming that my abstract is accepted, which I haven't heard yet. And I will certainly use Ye Tao, as Jonathan Cole has mentioned in the chat, and Doug McMartin and other people, and I've already used Stephen Salter to to help me obtain figures for the marine cloud brightening. So I think we can produce something pretty authoritative as far as albedo change is concerned. What we don't know is how much cooling power we actually need, and that is dependent quite a lot on things like the strength of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridian Overturning Circulation, how much albedo has been lost in the Arctic, that has been estimated. But what we don't have estimates from, I think, is the outgoing radiation, the infrared or thermal radiation output, and how much has that changed? Because there's a certain amount of negative feedback in the Arctic. So if you expose more ocean, not only does it absorb more in the short wavelength, the sunlight, but it also emits more in the infrared. So there's a negative feedback. I believe that there has been some work on how much that is. Dirk Knott's, a friend of Peter Wadham's, did some study on that. But the kind of albedo loss that we've talked about was 1.0 watts per square meter. So it's kind of compared to 2 watts per square meter of from CO2. So it's a huge albedo forcing in the Arctic. But there may be something nearly as much in terms of the negative forcing, cooling, produced by increased thermal radiation. And I just make that point that some work needs to be done on that side, and I'm all for testing. Now, one of our problems is producing outputs for people like Manager to take away and say, look, this is where we are, and all our research is pointing to the urgent need to priority for refreezing the Arctic, and that message has to go out, and we are putting together a suite of candidate methods, and so far we can give certain measures of how much cooling power they can produce, and where and what effects they might have. But there's until we've done some testing, it's just a suite of candidates, and they and I think that at the present state, we can say that stratospheric aerosol injection is can produce enough cooling even to deal with albedo loss of 1.0 watts per square meter in the Arctic, and possibly more than that. Doug McMartin doesn't do it by that kind of calculation. He does it through models, but he obtains a very similar figures when you kind of dig inside the models and see what kind of cooling power they're expecting from the sulfate aerosol. It works out to roughly the same, equivalent to 1 watt per square meter. So that's very encouraging, and we've looked at all suggested side effects, and the only real one that one can tangible one is the ozone hole. Doug has done some calculations to suggest that that's manageable, especially if we tighten up on the Montreal Protocol and stop emitting CFCs. So that's our current position. As I think in our group, there's a lot of debate on whether marine cloud brightening is an alternative, but I see that as ridiculous, because you can do marine cloud brightening as well as stratospheric aerosol injection. So we should be doing both, and the sooner we can get them working, the better. And if that requires trials in order to get credibility up, then let's get trials going. And that there are possibility of trials. I've suggested one to Doug McMartin. We could trial putting up a stratospheric aerosol to try and reduce temperatures when there are heat domes building up. So last year there were 5 heat domes at roughly the same latitudes around the planet, causing heat waves. And if one had put cooling sulfate aerosol at that latitude, it would spread around the latitude easterly. It would be blown easterly by the strong winds at that latitude, and had a cooling action which you could probably measure or at least calculate. And even if it was very small, that would be a demonstration, and you could see if there are any side effects wherever that worked. So I think that would be a sensible trial thing to propose, and it's the kind of thing that perhaps the US government could do on behalf of the other countries which are affected by this kind of heat extreme. And I don't think there'll be any downsides. We'd have to kind of look at whether that would be a downside for any country on the scale of vetoing something that's being done to protect by the US government, to protect its own citizens, which is what it would be doing.
Now,
So
of course,
so that's my concrete proposal as an output from the Prague group, unless there are any serious suggestions otherwise. And we could put this to the Finnish government as part of the way of persuading them that stratospheric aerosol is not something to be frightened about. It's actually something which could be done. We could do a trial quite simply and pretty innocuously, but in such a way that it would actually produce a positive effect in the right direction that we want.
I think it will be essential to go to governments of countries like Finland. Of course, the United States has just issued this major report on exactly this topic of the call for a significant research program into solar radiation management, and has the report responded to the congressional request by saying that there would be no funding provided. I did want to just make one further example. Now, Jonathan's put a couple of things into the chat about material emissivity, but the work that Doug McMartin has done on the modelling of stratospheric aerosol injection is summarised in this chart, which I just found immensely valuable, and I've probably shared it before, but it's this idea that with this on the right, the interventions in terms, this is about I think 20 million tonnes of SO2 per year. I would prefer that they talked in tonnes rather than teragrams. Sorry, that's gone to the previous slide. But the key thing from this this chart is the observation that that SAI could by 2070 completely balance the heating from warming under the socioeconomic pathway of the IPCC. So there is a lot of technical work that's been done on this quantification, and the GeoMIP community is really central to that work, and so understanding the scale of existing research is just really valuable for all of this EEI and comparative work. All right, anyone else? So
can we move on to the other items on the agenda that I posed?
Yes.
Because we've had an hour on that one. Ron Bayman has produced a document. I don't know if any of you have been through it. I can't honestly say I digested it, but I think Doug has had a look at the document and was quite impressed by how succinct it was in producing a list of possible interventions. Is that right, Doug?
In fact, I was so impressed I sent it to Bill McKibben.
Yeah.
I think the shorter the better, and I told him this is probably about as long as his Crucial Years weekly blog, so hopefully he'll read it. I think it's short enough that Bill will might take a look.
So can you give a summary of what he's saying?
In summary, he says exactly what you say pretty much in your first white paper, but the 18 direct cooling measures, he's still down to, I didn't count, but probably 18 bullet points, 18 phrases. It goes bip, 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 and then he goes on. So he doesn't spend a lot of time on all of the nitty gritty, but he does. I didn't read every single word of it, but I read enough of it to think that maybe it was appropriate to give the sort of overview and the rationale for why we believe what we believe. In fact, he says it at the top in like the second paragraph, and again in the conclusions at the end, that we're in a pickle and we need to do something now. So he started and closed, I think, very effectively.
Okay. So that leads me to wonder whether we should revise that white paper, because it was several years ago, with some more recent methods and studies, and so we can update references, and there's some more specific ideas on ice thickening from Seb and others, and even from Yetao, on ice thickening. And then there's work on cloud removal, a little bit of advanced since in the last 2 years, perhaps, I don't know. Cirrus cloud brightening removal sometimes gets mentioned as a contender for in the Arctic. Though when I emailed to the main research on that, he said that it doesn't produce enough albedo change for what you need. So so we could do that revision. At the moment, I'm concentrating on trying to calculate the kind of power that these different cooling power that these different methods could produce, because it's all very well arguing qualitatively about different methods, but unless you can put some figures on it, it's not really, you can't really compare one method or with another unless you've got those physical measurements, as Robert was saying, Robert Chris was saying. So that's certainly something we could do. How do we get this out into the public? That seems to be always our problem. We can produce very good things internally, which we think are very good and very convincing. But Doug is doing great things, trying to persuade Bill McGibbon. I think a big opportunity seemed to open up with the Cambridge people. I'm not sure whether that's having much international effect, except we've got George Soros seem to be gunning for us, and we need him to support the kind of all-embracing project that's really needed. A really well-designed project for refreezing the Arctic, which includes all the methods and doesn't just focus on marine cloud brightening or something that sounds nice to do.
Doug?
My thought is, who is the public we're trying to convince? And I'm convinced even Bernie Sanders, of all people, is so stuck in his little political box, he can't talk about this. I was told this almost explicitly in those words, not quite, by a representative who is now the junior senator, Peter Welch, when he agreed to deliver our letter to John Kerry. He said, we agree, we're passionate, we're all on board, but people are hard to convince. So he basically said, we can't talk about this because our jobs are at stake. So my point is, Bill McKibben could influence Michael Mann, who's tied very closely to Gavin Schmidt. And these three people are just a few of the influential thought leaders, I think, that could sway other people who might see the light of day. I don't know. I don't think going to politicians is going to bear fruit. I think we need to almost embarrass Michael Mann. And I don't know how to do that because he's convinced he's right and Jim Hansen's wrong. But I think we need to kind of think outside the box somehow. I'm not sure what the answer is.
Well, we've got a great great guru in Jim Hansen and his papers on the what's in the pipeline. I think we could certainly use those because his knowledge of the way the planet works is supreme.
I see my hand's still up, so I'm going to take the opportunity. Yeah, but he you know, he's convinced that he's right, and he's not doing anything to tell Michael Mann that he's wrong. So, I mean, I love Jim Hansen, but I think we have to play hardball with Bill McKibben, and I've tried also Andy Revkin. He doesn't seem to be up to the task these days. But, you know, Andy Revkin claims to be the first author of the first book on global warming, which is what Bill McKibben says he is. So we got a little rivalry there, but I thought I could parlay that into something. That didn't work. But people like Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, Elizabeth Colbert, you know, there's a lot of people who are afraid of the milky white sky. We already have a milky white sky every day. So it's a little bit different. I've tried that tack with Bill too, but he ignores it. I think their egos are too stuck in what they've claimed in the past. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, one of the nice things about what Anton is doing in his group is to praise the people who are on to emissions reduction, not to say, you know, it's the road to suicide and, you know, it will lead to extinction of civilization, if not the human race, and a few other species along with it. Although that might be the effect if it continues. I really like the way they say that that's really great, but we have to deal with the damage that's going to come along the way, and try to avoid the damage that will happen if you just pursue that alone. So I like that tone.
Now Jonathan wants to speak.
Jonathan.
Thanks. Yeah. Is it okay if I just introduce this other topic, even if we don't take it up? I wanted people to think about it for the next meeting. Three basic points. Like they only need one sentence each, really. The topic, of course, is the fear of testing whatever system of climate solution. Is the fear of testing logical? And I take the argumentative position that it is not. And the three reasons are, the natural world is a pretty violent place. Every 20 to 50 years, we have a major volcanic eruption that spews anywhere from, 5 to 50 megatons of sulfur into the atmosphere. And we go on about our business, and the crops grow, and the people fish, and the children are born, and we go on about our business with something that would be akin to a fantastically enormous test. And the other point is that where's the evidence in the historical record of the last 100 or 200 years of a scientific test that resulted in something terrible? Obviously, we can't use examples like the atom bomb, since they were trying to develop a destructive weapon. So of course the results were terrible. But in trying to do something fairly neutral to the environment, where's the example of great harm?
There are those examples, Jonathan. I think the cane toad in Australia is a primary example.
Okay, okay.
Just
Just let me make the third point, which is that reference to let's do it right this time, because maybe in history, not just that example, but maybe in history generally, we haven't been thoughtful enough about industry and progress, so that we should do it right this time. Is a bit of, it's not an objective argument, it's subjective. It's a sensation of how history could be better or regret. So those are the 3 points. Nature does things that are very violent that we live through fairly well, with most people not even noticing. The examples of science making a mistake in the past should be looked at, each one, and it should be evaluated what the cost benefit was overall for all of science and all of testing versus those bad results. And then I'd like to set aside a doing it right this time as sort of a spiritual statement. So those are the 3 points.
I would say in response that the fear question is, I wouldn't put it so much in terms of fear as in terms that there is I suppose a political theory that that cutting emissions is the only effective response to climate change, and that political theory rests on the idea that if it's possible to mobilize a mass movement to shut down fossil fuels, then we can stop climate change, and that's got quite a bit of support from the IPCC with their call to halve emissions by 2030. And so the general view is that action to increase albedo simply undermines that political agenda of shutting down fossil fuels. So rather than a
hazard argument, that's not the fear of testing argument. That's a separate argument. We have to treat them separately, and we have to.
Well, okay, but it's not. I don't think it is a separate argument, because they say that the reason that we shouldn't test is that that would give succor to give support to the idea that we can address climate change by increasing albedo, and the mass movement opinion is that that's politically incorrect, and so it's that
fear of testing and the moral hazard or other reasons you give, they work together. I agree, and there's some overlap, but the fear of testing is an independent thing that I think as a science group we can approach that objectively and try to defeat that leg of the problem.
So fear is about safety, and safety is I suppose about feasibility and viability, so that they're intimately linked. Now, the manager wanted to respond.
Yes, I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's important to acknowledge that you have to cut off the source, so you're not continuously increasing the problem. And what I try to help people understand is that there is a gap between emissions reduction and what is needed for climate restoration. And so I just want to be sure it's not, it's clearly not either or. It's very important to acknowledge that it's both. And I understand the moral hazard argument, and many others. I may be quiet because I'm learning, but I'm keeping pretty close tabs, and I am especially keeping track of acronyms and basic concepts so that I can help people in my community. We have Climate Week coming up, and I'll be doing a presentation on climate science and potential solutions. And this is a pretty big deal here in the Hudson Valley. And I will be listing the ones that I've kept track of by whether or not they're in the on land, in the ocean, or in the atmosphere, and helping people to understand the different layers, etc. So I just really want to stress that we have to be very careful to never pose it as either or, but to, you know, uh, be very clear that it's both, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Manager.
So
Okay.
that is really encouraging the repair idea, isn't it? Repair the damage that's caused, that's being caused and will be caused if there isn't any counterposing strategy, parallel strategy of increasing the albedo and refreezing the Arctic. So I think that's very good. I was wondering whether to help you, Manager, whether we could, whether you might like to introduce our temperature trajectory diagram. I mean, most people have no idea what's actually happening to the temperature, and what will happen if we don't intervene. And that's very clear from our diagram that it will go up and will reach could reach 4 degrees by 2070, and almost certainly this century, according to Jim Hansen. So we've got to do cooling, and in the long term, we've got to get the CO2 level down. Since in our diagram we have a strong amount of CDR and perhaps some methane removal, certainly some methane repression as well, because we want the CO2e, which is the combined effect of greenhouse gases, down to 380 by within 50 years. That's the target suggested on the diagram. So stopping the Arctic getting any warmer, 5 years, stopping global warming temperatures, stop them going higher, 10 years, and greenhouse gases down to a previous level, the 1980 level, and do that in 50 years. But I think that those are sensible targets which could be achieved if there was a concerted effort by one or two world powers could do it in collaboration, but it'd be nice to involve everybody in doing what they can towards the emissions reduction, if that's what they feel they're good at doing. Albedo enhancement, if they want to paint their houses rooftops white. Everybody can chip in to help on this, on a kind of global project to get the planet back into back into shape, back into the kind of Holocene conditions that we've all enjoyed. We're coming very nearly to the end of our hour and a half. I just there was some. I think we should be preparing something very specific for the Finnish government, because I think they might well be able to spearhead this. I'd like to think that the Canadian government would come and help on the refreezing the Arctic. They have a bad track record because they squashed a very good experiment into ocean iron fertilization done very carefully by Russ George, and then they not only stopped him, but they pinched all the data that he collected. That was absolutely scurrilous, in my opinion. They just listened to people who didn't like interfering with the Earth system on principle. And what he showed was that it did an enormous good. What he showed, it increased phytoplankton, and the salmon catch was enormous. There was a cooling effect. He was mimicking what a local volcano did. So it wasn't as if he was doing it without any prior experimentation. The volcano had already done the experimental work for him, but the government took fright, just as the Swedish government did by invoking Sami to stop a very innocent balloon experiment proposed by David Keith and co. So, governments do respond with gut reaction to the public who are against any kind of interference. So if we could persuade the Finnish government to step out, and they probably need some support from the Sami. We need to find the people in Sami who've got open minds and really do want the Arctic to be frozen for their own benefit, and point out that it's gone so far that we're nearly stymied. We've really got to pull out all the stops if we're going to refreeze the Arctic. So I think that might be my closing remark for this meeting. Unless
Jonathan's got one final comment as well.
Yeah,
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly my point. We need to have a powerful, well thought out presentation which says, look, the background variation in Earth climate produced by the Earth, climate changes of statistical effects, such as things that vary in random ways, and then sometimes there's a rogue wave, essentially. Then there's things like volcanoes that blast off, and then there's other major effects. It's kind of like a background. There's a background variation going on, and we're asking to do a tiny little test inside this giant natural background variation. It's like a person with a watering can putting a little water on a plant and then that same afternoon there's a rainstorm that dumps 2 inches of rain. It's like, so there's this giant variation background that people take for, they accept it because it's nature. And we're just trying to do something small in comparison to that. And then, where's the evidence of all the millions of scientific experiments done over the last 100 years? How many of them resulted in a single death or 100 deaths or the death of a species? Maybe they're there, maybe they're not. So we we have to make a well thought out presentation to counter this gut reaction, which is going to get us all killed if we allow it to run the day and control the argument now and next year and 10 years from now. If we just ride into this thing the way we're going now, it's not going to go well.
We're coming to the end. I just wanted to acknowledge that Evan and Albert have joined the meeting, and thank you for being here with us. We're at the end of our time. If you wanted to say hello, that's okay, but we won't take time for more comments. So, Evan, you've unmuted. Did you want to speak?
Just and to whom are we addressing this, and how soon can we ask for the money, and who should get the money? I haven't heard those specifics. I think it's implicit in some of what I've heard, but anyway, that's what I would like to know more about, and maybe it's coming up next time.
Very good. Okay, yeah, they're essential questions. Thank you, Evan. All right. We've come to the end of our time, so thank you all very much for joining.
Bye. Thank
Goodbye.
you.